Okay, we're recording.
Okay. Well, welcome. This is the last night of the Alef Tav class. We're going to be doing the letters Shin and the letter Tav. And I'm going to share my screen, maybe. Um, can anybody see that? Because I can't see anybody. So somebody's going to have to like verbally tell me that they can.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. So we're starting with the letter Shin. Of course, the letter Shin is the 21st letter of the alphabet, and it has a numerical value of 300. And the ancient pictograph of the Shin is of two front teeth. So I don't know. Um, like when I look at this right here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the upper left pictograph, um, it looks like maybe like a vampire type teeth. So I don't know who has those front teeth, but that's what it's supposed to represent. Um, the Sheen means to press, to destroy, to consume, and it carries the idea of a fire. And Sheen can make the sound of sh, the sh as in shy, if the dot is on the right hand side of it. So up and to the right of it, there would be a little dot and it would make the sh sound. And it makes an s sound if the dot is on the left hand side or the upper left of the Sheen. So in none of these pictures does it show the dot, but it can make either one of those sounds, the sh or the s. If it's making the s sound, they refer to that as the letter seen, and it's phonetically identical to the samach. And in some words, the seen and the samach seem to be interchangeable. In other words, the definition doesn't change in the word if if it's basically the same word with a samach or a seen in it. The definition doesn't change. So it lends to the idea that the samach and the seen were actually just one letter at some point. Um, but eventually the seen or whatever got moved over to the sheen, and then there was a need to make a samach. I don't know exactly how it worked in history, but there seems to be a little bit of overlap. And it's sort of like the vav. Um, the vav in ancient times was either an O or a U. It never made a V sound. The V sound belonged to the bait. The bait made a B, a hard B sound, if it had a dagesh in it. And if it didn't, it made a V sound, like as in violet or violin. Um, and so a lot of these letters probably lost, um, some of their original uh, the way they sounded. Like I said, the Vav was originally an O or a U. It didn't make the V sound at all. And you see that in a lot of words. And I could go into it, but that's for some other day. And that's you can if you want to do further study on the Vav, you can. But so today we're just looking at the letter Sheen, and so we'll continue here. Um, some of the words that begin with the letter Sheen would be like shalom, Shabbat, shofar, shir, shoresh, shavuot, shem, shemen. Um, and we could say some things, but you see the definitions there. Um, one thing I do want to talk about there is um, the word Shem is also obviously a name. Um, and so when sometimes Jewish people will refer to God the Father as Hashem, which is just the name, because they won't say Yod He Vav He. Um, And so also in the Old Testament, there are references to the name of the Lord. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But just to let you know, the phraseology, the name of the Lord, is a reference to the Messiah. Um, and so we'll talk about the name of the Lord a little bit more as we move forward. Um, so the words that have a shin in them that are related to fire are obviously the word fire, which is esh, and then the word for man or husband is ish. The word for woman or wife is isha. And then of course there's shemayim, which is heaven, of course. And so some would say that the definition of heaven is actually fire water, because the word for water is mayim. And so with the sheen in front of it, and sheen representing symbolically representing fire, shemayim can represent fire water. And there's a whole teaching behind that, which of course we don't have time to get into. But something that I remember hearing, and might have been from Stephanie, because I think she's done some teachings on this. If you look at the word for man, if you look to the right there, you see the Alef, the Yod, and the Sheen. And then for the word for woman, you see the Alef, the Sheen, and the Hey. And of course, when the man and the wife come together, um, basically, it would just be fire. It would just be, when a marriage, uh, is without God, it would be pretty destructive. But when you add the Yod and the Hey, so there you see those words, they both have Esh in them. They both have fire in them. But the man has the Yod, and the woman, or the word for woman, has Hey in it. And when you take the Yod and the Hey together, it's the first part of God's name, Yah. And so when Yah is involved with the man and the woman, then it creates a healthy relationship. If you would take the Yod and the Hey out of both Ish and Isha, all you'd be left with would be fire, and it would be a very destructive relationship. Now, I didn't explain that quite as well as Stephanie would have, but I think you get the point. So that's just a little something about how fire would relate. And so we look at the verses in Deuteronomy chapter 4 and Hebrews chapter 12. For the Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God. And then Hebrews says, for our God is a consuming fire. So let's move on. Let me move my little window over a little. Sheen is also sometimes used as an abbreviation for the title El Shaddai, because obviously the first letter in Shaddai is the Sheen. So you can see here the priests, they're giving the priestly blessing or priestly benediction found in Numbers chapter 6. And whenever they would say that prayer, according to some Jewish writings, they would make that Mr. Spock symbol with their hands, live long and prosper. And so, but El Shaddai means, a lot of people think it means God Almighty, but it doesn't. It means the many-breasted God, or the all-providing God. And so when they speak the priestly blessing over you, if they did in fact do this, and there's no reason to assume they didn't, but if they did in fact make that symbol with their fingers, form the letter Sheen with their fingers, the kind of crooked W. Um, when they said that priestly blessing, what they were invoking is the all-providing God. It wasn't so much like, God is so tough he can take care of all of our problems or beat up all of our enemies. That's too limited. This is an all-providing God. It doesn't matter whether maybe you don't need might out of your God. Maybe you don't need him to be strong. Maybe you need him to be something else. And so that El Shaddai means he can provide anything at any time under any circumstances. And that's what the priests are doing there. They're giving you that, forming that letter shin, um, so that as they say the priestly blessing, that the priestly blessing would come forward with all the provision that you would need in your life, and that blessing would provide that to you through El Shaddai. So that's that, and I think I have one more slide here, and this is a reference to Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 10 through 12. I didn't write the verse in there, but you can just trust me on that one. And Moses says, "But when you cross over the Jordan and dwell in the land which Jehovah your Elohim is giving you to inherit, and he gives you rest from all your enemies round about, so that you dwell safely, then there will be the place where the Jehovah your Elohim chooses to make his name abide." Again, the name of the Lord. It's kind of a reference to Messiah, but we will also continue. There you shall bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, the heave offerings of your hand, and all your choice offerings, which you vow to the Lord. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your sons and your daughters, your male and female servants, and the Levite who is within your gates, since he has no portion nor inheritance with you. So what you're seeing there with the picture is you're seeing a mirror image of a shin. Okay, so on the right-hand side, you see this purple line, the far right, that is the Kidron Valley. Then you see coming off of the Kidron Valley, a line coming up the middle, and that is the Tyropian Valley. And then lastly, you see the big sweeping line to the left, that is the Hinnom Valley. And in between those, to the far right of the Kidron Valley is, of course, the Mount of Olives. And then in the middle between the Kidron Valley and the Tyropian Valley is the city of David and Mount Zion. And then to the left of the city of David, in between the Hinnom Valley and the Tyropian Valley, is what in ancient times was just sometimes called the Western Hill, but nowadays that's referred to as Mount Zion. Um, and so, but you can see the mirror image of the letter Shin overlaid on the valleys that are around Jerusalem. And the reason it's a mirror image is because the earth is said to reflect the heavenly Jerusalem. And so directly above the earthly Jerusalem is the heavenly Jerusalem. And of course, we know that there is a heavenly temple in that heavenly Mount Zion, that heavenly Jerusalem. And it is there that our high priest Yeshua, according to the book of Hebrews, it is there that he offers sacrifices and makes intercession for us today, those who are in covenant with him. And so even though there is no temple on the earthly Mount Zion, obviously we're still being ministered to and for by Yeshua in the heavenly tabernacles. He serves as our high priest and stands as our mediator. And so when we look at this concept of you will bring your sacrifices to the place where God will put his name. Well, the word for name is Shem, which starts with the letter Shin. And then also this idea of El Shaddai, one of the titles of God. It's not his name, it's just a title. Um, and you see the Shin there overlaid on that, the city of Jerusalem, by way of the valleys that have been formed around it. And so this is what many people, Jewish people in history, and they've just said, hey, this is the sign that the Lord has placed his name here. And that's not just because of the valleys. That the valleys are just simply a sign. Because the reason we know that God put his name there at some point was because David was specifically told to purchase the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite, which happened to be right there where it talks about, where it says, the word temple on that picture. That was the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. And of course, David purchased that and made offerings there in order to stop a plague. And so, it was there that David was informed that he, uh, that's where the altar would be. That's where the temple would be. And of course, David wasn't allowed to build that temple. His son Solomon built it, but it was specifically the place that God chose. That's where God placed his name. And so it was only later after that, because you have to remember, when David was, um, when he was the king, they were using a different script. The sheen kind of looked more a little bit like those teeth, the jagged fangs, a little bit like a W. Um, and it's all this sheen is the Aramaic script, and this was only used after the Babylonian captivity. So the fact that that mirror image of the sheen resembles the valley, um, I don't know if you would call it a coincidence, but let's just say this is the place that God chose his name long before they were using a sheen that looked like this one. Or I should say, they were using the sheen and this place long before they started using this version of the letter. So I think, yeah, that's it. So I'll stop sharing and I'll ask if there's any questions or comments about the letter sheen. Anybody want to add something or correct me on anything? Go ahead. This is
I
the
actually
oh, go ahead.
saw Amy Grant in concert several times. And at one point, she gave us, I was with a friend of my mother's, she gave us a vocab quiz in Hebrew for El
Wow.
Shaddai
Yeah.
and
Yeah, which
asked us
was
what it
like,
meant. And everyone said, God Almighty for El Shaddai. Okay,
yeah.
the
Yeah,
girls
and
so far. Now, what
that's
does Adonai mean? And everyone's yelling, Lord. And she said, okay, now, Eliana, silence. And she looked at all of us and said, you did better than most at my concert.
so yeah, Amy Grant, that is, I guess, probably her single greatest hit. I think she might have had a couple of other songs, but I've never really been a big fan of Amy Grant. Um, but I know that El Shaddai song, that was gigantic, back when I was a tad bit younger. Um, are there other comments? Or surely, Angie, you have a storm in your head right now of things that you could say.
Not really. I think you did a great job in teaching it. I've heard the thing about the map. That was super cool. Shabbat is probably one of my favorite words that begins with shin, just because it's such a perfect example of the rest that God intends to have with us and for us. And it contains both of the letters, right, that we're talking about today. So yeah, I don't know. I love the concept of Shabbat. I've been trying to do better at it. And so my Saturdays look quite different than they used to. But
So Angie,
yeah.
I would look at that word, Shabbat,
Mhm.
and I would take the shin and the bait, and I would put them together to make shuv, which is to return, and
Mm.
then the tav would be something related to the covenant. So it's
Mhm.
returning to the covenant. Is that how you would address that word?
Yeah, I did it not too long ago, when I was looking at the word, and when I was looking at the meanings of the letters, I actually ended up with, I think, eating a meal with your family as an example of the covenant or something like that.
Oh,
Because
okay.
that's essentially what the Shabbat is. It's a day of rest. It's a day to just, yeah, sit and eat and have time with your family. But you're doing that as an example to the rest of the world of what the covenant should look like.
Yeah,
So yeah, I like that about that word.
yeah. Karen, you had a question?
Not a question, but something that I would just put on the table and see what your response is. I've been in a Torah class for a little over a year now, once a week, and one of the things that sticks with me is he talked about Genesis 2, verses 2 to 3, where this is El Shaddai, as related to El Shaddai, because God created 6 days and then on the seventh day said to rest. This Jewish scholar taught us that a lot of the Jewish people believe and define El Shaddai as the God who knows when to say stop, the God who knows when to say enough is enough. And so he related that to him, God creating for 6 days, and then he stopped for rest on the seventh day. So I just wondered if you had ever heard that before.
I actually have. I think it's Rabbi David Foreman from Alpha
Mhm.
Beta who teaches that it's the God, it's an acronym. He uses El Shaddai as an acronym, meaning in Hebrew it's the God who knows when to stop, like as in stop creating. So
Okay, and this came through a Mark Gearson who is teaching on Eagle's Wings with Robert
yeah,
Stern's ministry. So
but
that's where I got that
yeah, but
teaching
Rabbi
from. But
Foreman stuff is all over the internet, so it's very available to and his books. So I
what's his name again, Stephanie?
Rabbi David Foreman, but Rachel probably heard it on um the Bima podcast because he brings it up and he got it from Rabbi David Foreman.
Yeah.
So Marion, you look like you wanted to say something too. So
Oh,
sorry, Ryan. I
Oh,
just
no,
like I
you're good.
remember when she said that, I'm like, oh yeah, ding ding ding, I remember.
Because Stephanie, just before Marion starts, no, I actually hadn't heard that.
Okay.
So I'm gonna have to call up Rabbi David and see if he can give me a little tutorial on that acronym. Go ahead, Marion.
the sheen is also on the mezuzah, and I think that it's interesting that the sheen also means a prince or warrior, as well as peace, shalom.
Hmm.
Sar is the name for prince, and shalom is the name for peace. And it's interesting that warrior and peace are the same, you know, the
Hmm.
same letter, start with the same letter.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and you hear there that's an example of where the letter is the seen in the word Sar. It's not Shar, it's Sar. So you see both usages of the letter sheen or seen, with the, of course, what is it, Isaiah, chapter 9, maybe, Sar Shalom, where it refers to the Prince of Peace, God being a child that would be born, and he'd be somehow the Prince of Peace, but also the everlasting Father, which is really weird for
Isaiah 9:6.
9:6. Yeah, and I think it might refer to him as El Gibor. This child who was to be born would be the mighty God, which is really weird for some people who study the Old Testament and don't think that the Messiah is divine. It's almost like they totally ignore Isaiah 9:6, but I'm sure they have an answer for that. But
And in Hebrew, okay, I want to make sure my mic was on. In Hebrew, they take all of those in Isaiah 9 and they put a comma between all of them. So there's actually 7 attributes. So it's not just Prince of Peace, but Prince and Peace, so it's like mighty God, 2 different words, everlasting and Father. So all of those are separated by commas, and they're more like 7 attributes, which of course 7 is godly number. So number of perfection. I thought that was interesting when I realized that.
I did want to say, if I could, the name Yeshua, when I was looking at it not too long ago, and I know those attributes are separated, but you can put some of those attributes together, and his name Yeshua actually spells out each of the attributes. So the yod being let's see, it's the wonder. Oh, I'm gonna mess this up now.
It's Pele Yoetz.
Yeah, it's the wonderful counselor. The wonderful means doing great deeds or miracles, and that's what the yod is doing. And a counselor, the other word for that is rabbi. It's a teacher. So and teacher of the law specifically, which is what yod is. And then the shin being the mighty God, the everlasting Father being the ayin. Because it's a fountain, which is everlasting. And then Prince of Peace with the Vav, because a Vav is bringing 2 things together. So I just thought that was cool.
Stephanie, take over the conversation for a minute. I'm going to go blow my nose.
Okay. Thanks for letting us know. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say about that, that's good, Angie. Because I think that I thought it was interesting because we kind of are set in saying, mighty God, wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. But also talking about El Shaddai, when it talks about a God of many breasts, it's actually referring to him more like a mother, and that he is a motherly type to his children. So he holds them at his breast, he holds them and protects them, and also provides for them, which somebody already said. Whereas when that was the name, as you probably know, he gave Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But then in Exodus, he says, I gave El Shaddai to, these patriarchs, but to you, I am Yod He Vav He. I am everything and everything you need. And so it was a different concept in a sense that he was going to provide for them, and not that he obviously stopped providing for the children of Israel, but he wanted them to understand that he was also everything they needed. So not just a provider. So any other questions or thoughts? Go ahead.
I just want to say it's so great in the way that you're describing that, because when you think about it, it is much the same as we have to do as parents. We are one way towards our children, but there's a
Mm.
completely different aspect of me that will come out if you try to hurt my children.
Mhm.
That's a different
Mama bear.
person entirely. We are the same person, but we're housed in this body together, and you will
Mhm.
only see one of them unless you mess with my kids.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good
Yeah.
point. And just as a little commercial, so because Brian just sat down, but so we have a Friday night show, Lauren Cruz and I, and we're gonna be doing Angie's book on that show starting in March. And so Angie's gonna be on the show. I already talked to her about that, and or at least once, but she can be on as often as she wants. And but she's going to give the introduction and kind of get us started, and then if she wants to come in for other nights and other Fridays. But we're going to probably do a couple of there's her chapters are kind of short, so we'll probably do a couple of chapters for each hour long show. Okay, so that starts in March if you want to come.
And Angie, I got your book last Tuesday, on our last Monday on our meeting, and I was so excited, but you weren't here to hear that excitement.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I was dealing with some pain issues, but we're good now. But thank you.
That's
It's so
good.
awesome that you got the book. Awesome.
I'll be
Um,
quiet now.
are we ready to continue? Or are there more comments about Sheen? If not, I'll go back to the Tav and we'll get going. Okay, somebody say they can see my screen. And then we'll,
I can see it.
Lola and I see it.
you see it?
Yep, so does Lola.
Okay, so the last letter, the Hebrew letter Tav, it is the 22nd letter of the alphabet and has a numerical value of 400. The ancient pictogram or pictograph of the Tav is a cross. As I don't know if you can see my cursor, that's the early one, and then it kind of gets a little bit sideways there, and then it goes more into the Aramaic script. So the Tav means a mark, a sign, or a seal, and it carries the idea of a covenant. And so this is there's a lot sort of to that, and we'll get into it just a little part of that as we move on here. But the Tav can make a T if it has a dot in the middle of it, or a dagesh, or it can make the sound of TH if it does not have the dot. So two different sounds, either a t or a th, like a the sound, or a like the sound in the word thin, or the sound in the word tin. Okay, so some of the words that begin with the letter Tav are, of course, the word Tav, which means a mark. The word Toda, which is thank you. And if you're ever in Israel, you can say to all of your people who serve you along the way, you can say Toda, Toda Laba, which is thank you very much. And so then there is Tehillim, which is the word for Psalms. Of course, Torah or Torah is, of course, it means instruction. It doesn't mean law, it means instruction. Then you have the word Tanin, which is the word for dragon, but it's usually translated as crocodile in Bibles. But it's okay, it's the word dragon. And that's the word you see in like Revelation chapter 12, when John sees a vision of a fiery red dragon sweeping a third of the stars with his tail. pursuing this woman who was giving birth to a child. In the Hebrew Revelation, they properly use the word tanin for dragon. Then there's Tehelet, and that is the light blue color that is used in much of the Hebrew temple, the Jewish temple, or the Israeli temple, Temple of Yah, on the curtains, in the high priest's garments. Today, it is to be used, and for all time, it was to be used for people who wore tzitzit, that techelet. It begins with the letter tav. Then, of course, you have the letter, or the word, I'm sorry, thummim is how most people say it when they're talking about the Urim and the Thummim. But it's actually pronounced Tumim. And it means perfections. Of course, Urim means lights, and Tumim means perfections. And that was, of course, a way that the kings and priests would discern God's will through these stones that were used, and they were hidden inside the high priest's breastplate. And then there's, of course, the word tamim, which means without defect. So you can see a similarity in those two words, tumim and tamim. One is perfections, and one is without defect. And when I say without defect, what I mean by that is the word that is used of offerings and sacrifices. They were supposed to be without spot or blemish. That's tamim, without any defect, a perfect sacrifice. And of course, this refers to, it's a reference to Yeshua, of course. When he died on the cross, he was a lamb that didn't have any spots or blemish. He was a perfect sacrifice. So, it's interesting. I could say a lot more about that, but I won't for the sake of time. So I want to go into a couple of words in regard to the actual word, or things in regard to the actual word tav. And this is in Ezekiel chapter 9, because this is where one of the more famous places where the word tav is used. And it says, starting in verse 1 of chapter 9, it says, "Then he called out in my hearing with a loud voice, saying, Let those who have charge over the city draw near, each with a deadly weapon in his hand. And suddenly 6 men came from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north, each with his battle axe in his hand. One man among them was clothed with linen and had a writer's inkhorn at his side. They went in and stood beside the bronze altar. Now the glory of the God of Israel had gone up from the cherub, where it had been, to the threshold of the temple. And he called to the man clothed with linen, who had the writer's inkhorn at his side. And the Lord said to him, Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and put a mark. That's the word for tav, or that word, Hebrew word, is tav. Put a tav on the foreheads of the men who sigh and cry over all the abominations that are done within it. So here you see Ezekiel is seeing he's seeing a scene in the spirit. Prior to this moment, he is being shown all of the abominations that the leaders of Jerusalem are doing, both priests and other political type leaders. They're doing all kinds of abominations. Even the women have started worshiping the ancient Sumerian god Tammuz. and by extension, of course, his mommy, his mother slash wife. And so Ezekiel's shown all these things. And there are certain people in the city who are sighing and crying over the fact that Jerusalem has fallen into such idolatry, such abomination. And so God sends these men, 6 men, who have battle axes. And they're going to come and they're going to wipe out Jerusalem. Now, this is what Ezekiel's seeing in the spirit, but what's in fact happening in the physical is Nebuzaradan is there, the general of the Babylonian host, and they're about to breach the walls and completely wipe out the city of Jerusalem and burn down the temple. And so before the Babylonians are allowed to come into the city and wipe everybody out, God sends one man among the 6 men, a man clothed in linen, with a writer's inkhorn, and he puts a tav on the forehead of all those who are sighing and crying over the abominations that are done within that city. And so this is a mark of protection, so that the people with this tav on their foreheads are not harmed by the Babylonians. And so then, interestingly, oops, okay, hang on, something bad happened. Let me see if I can bring that up. For some reason, okay, there we go. Let me try to share my, darn it. Okay. Somebody yell if they can still see this slide because something got messed up there.
I
can
can
see
still
it.
see it.
Okay. So now, having just talked about the Ezekiel chapter 9 passage, and if you want to read all about that, it's absolutely fascinating, talking about the presence of God, the glory of God, the Shekinah, leaving the Holy of Holies, then leaving, it's standing over what would call now the Nicanor Gate. And then, of course, it stands over the Eastern Gate. And then, of course, it goes to the Mount of Olives. And then the glory of God ascends because of the abomination of because of the abominations that are occurring in that city. But now when we turn to Revelation 7, we see a very similar thing. And when you look at the Hebrew version of the book of Revelation, it says some interesting things here. So I'm going to read verse 1. After these things, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed. That's the word in the Hebrew book of Revelation, the Hebrew version. The word is tav. We have put a tav on the servants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of those who were sealed. 144,000 from all the tribes of the children of Israel. And then, of course, it goes on and names 12,000 from the tribes. So in both cases, where there were the people in Ezekiel sighing and crying over the abominations that were occurring right before the destruction of Jerusalem, and now here in Revelation, you see these 4 angels that are about ready to be unleashed to destroy the earth. And one angel comes up from the rising of the sun, and he, like in Ezekiel, apparently has a writer's inkhorn or a seal, a signet ring, And he is going to put a tav on the foreheads of the servants of God so that they are not harmed. And there are 144,000 of these that receive this mark. And so I want to talk about these words that pertain to a mark or a seal and explain the difference. Sometimes these words are used for a sign, a seal, etc. And so there's this word that is used also because there's another word for mark in the book of Revelation and also in Genesis chapter 4. There's the mark of the beast. Okay, but there's also in Genesis chapter 4 the mark that was put on Cain. Now in Genesis chapter 4, the word for mark there is oath. And it is the word for a sign or a warning. It could just mean a sign like a stop sign or a deer crossing sign or and everybody knows what those mean. I mean, when you're driving down the road, you see a speed limit sign that says, maybe it says 45 miles per hour. And of course, that sign means you're only allowed to go somewhere around 20 to 30 miles an hour over that limit. I'm just joking. Of course, it means you must only go 45. But it's a sign, or it could be a sign in the heaven, like we see in Revelation chapter 12, where John says, I saw an oath, a sign in heaven. It was a woman clothed with the sun and with the moon on her feet, and a garland of 12 stars on her head. And she was about ready to give birth. Okay, that's an oath. It's a sign. So when it comes to the mark of the beast, that word is not the word tav in the Hebrew version of Revelation. That's the word seman. And it comes from sema, which is a Greek word that was probably used in Hellenistic times. You don't see the word seman. The earliest usage of seman in Hebrew is actually, before the Hebrew revelation was actually found in the Mishnah. It wasn't found before then. So it's probably something that came from the Greek simon, the word simon, and which just means a sign. But when the Hellenists had taken over that region, probably it was a loan word. The Hebrews probably used a Greek word, and they began using sema at some point, or seman. But that's the word in the Hebrew revelation that's used for the mark of the beast. But it just means a sign. And so sema and oath are probably like interchangeable. And so that's the word for a sign that can be seen for the same words or the same meaning of the words for the mark that was put on Cain and also the mark of the beast. Now that's interesting because if you think about what the mark on Cain actually meant, it was a warning sign that no one was allowed to kill Cain, because remember Cain's complaint. Hey, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Now everybody who sees me will want to kill me. And there's a whole lot packed into that statement all by itself. But the point is that God puts a sign on him, that an oath, later it might have been used of the word sema or saman, which was a warning sign. Okay, well, here's what's interesting about that Cain receives a warning. It's a sign, but it's a warning to everybody else. Don't touch this guy. He has my protection. Well, in Revelation, isn't it interesting that when people take the mark of the beast, it says that at the fifth trumpet, there are locusts type creatures that are released out of the abyss. And it is given to them to be able to harm men, torture men for 5 months. but they're not allowed to kill them, just like Cain. So I think it's kind of interesting. There's some real parallels there. Now, in the Greek translation of the book of Revelation, the word for mark is charagma. And that word for mark is just, it's a mark, but it's actually like an engraving. And the only other usage outside of the book of Revelation for the word charagma is in Acts chapter 17, where Paul is speaking in the Areopagus in Athens, and he's referring to idols that have been etched or carved or engraved. This, if in the Septuagint, would be like a graven image. Thou shalt not have any graven images, anything engraved or carved as an idol. So the Greek usage that you might see, say, for example, in Codex Vaticanus or Codex Sinaiticus, would be charagma. And so the idea is somehow this mark is inscribed or carved or engraved or etched. That's the idea of charagma, but it has the properties of being a sign that is a warning sign almost to others, not unlike the mark that was placed on Cain. Now, in Hebrew, the word for seal is katam, and it's the equivalent of the Greek word I can't even say it, sphragizo. And that, the word for seal, is katam in Hebrew, sphragizo in Greek, or however you would say that, I don't know. But it is a mark signifying security, protection, and authentication. That's what we would have like here when it's talking about, where it's talking about the 144,000 being sealed. It is the Greek word, it would be the Greek word sphragizo. It's a sign of protection, of security, of authentication. In other words, these are my documents. These are, in this case, these are my people. But it would be the Hebrew word katam. But what's interesting here is that's not what's used. What's used is tav, which is God's personal seal. So when you look at Ephesians chapters 1 and chapter 4, it talks about the believer being sealed by the Holy Spirit. That's the word sphragizo, or whatever, however you would say that. But here in Revelation, these people are sealed with God's mark. They're sealed with a tav, and that tav, of course, would look like the letter tav, which in paleo looked like a cross. So maybe the seal of God has something to do with a cross, but we do know that later on in Revelation it describes 144,000. And even right here in chapter 7, it talks about the seal of God in their foreheads, but later on it talks and it says that the name of their God, the name, is written in their forehead. So you would have, like, if God's an English speaker, which he probably is, it would just be that YHVH. But if he's into the paleo Hebrew, then you would see those other signs of the yod, the hey, the vav, and the hey. And if he was in the more proto-Sinaitic, in the later, sort of early Hebrew, it would be the next. And then, of course, if God is like an Aramaic speaking God, it would be there. But it might just be, for some people, it just seems that there was a tav, because if you remember back in Ezekiel, the angel who the man clothed in linen, maybe that's not an angel, maybe that's Yeshua, we don't know. But he's somebody probably of a priestly order, in the heavenly priesthood. And he is given a writer's inkhorn, and he is told to put a tav, that would be a cross, on people's foreheads. Because you have to understand, at that time, that's what a tav looked like. It was a cross. And so it's possible that the same sign will be, or mark would be used for the 144,000. But I think what it mainly points to is this idea of a tav being, the word tav being used in the Hebrew version of Revelation, as well as in the book of Ezekiel chapter 9. Because the word tav is tied to covenant making, I think what it's really saying is that this is a sealing, a mark on the people who are in covenant with God. I think that's really what the mark of the beast is also saying, even though it's sort of a different word usage. It carries the same idea that those people are in covenant with the dragon or Satan. And in the same way that we come into covenant with the Father through Jesus, who is the Christ, at the end times, the people who are taking the mark of the beast, they're coming into covenant with Satan through the Antichrist. So it's essentially the same transaction, just with two different gods, so to speak. Um, so I think that is all that I have there. So I will stop my thing and open it up for questions. This is the interactive part of the class, so jump right in.
So, so the concept of cutting or engraving that you were talking about led me to think of, and then I had to go look it up because it's a long word, but it's the Hebrew word or words, two words, harath berit, and it means a cut covenant. And you probably already know what a cut covenant is, but when I went to go look it up, I mean, not just now, but when I went to go study this, I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this makes so much more sense, because the cut covenant, like you'll see it in scripture where I'll say, I will make a covenant with my people. I think that's what it says in Isaiah 61, the one I was looking at. And that's not what it says. It doesn't say, I'll make a covenant, I will cut a covenant. And that's important because the cut covenant was that you would cut an animal in half, and two people would walk in between the two halves of that animal. It sounds brutal, and it probably was, but as a sign that I'm going to do this thing that I promised you I'm going to do. And if I don't, this is what will become of me. Was kind of the idea. I don't know that they ever followed through on that, but it was a serious covenant that you were making with somebody, and it was through a cut covenant. And then thinking of that in regards to Jesus, because he said that he would cut this covenant with us. He was cut in his middle, just like you would cut an animal down the middle. He was cut, and so he made that cut covenant with us, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, that's absolutely 100% right. And yeah, I never thought about that in terms of the word charagma for the etching. Maybe in taking the mark of the beast, maybe there is the shedding of blood, and that would qualify for that cutting of the covenant. A shedding of blood there, and very interesting. Very interesting stuff. But yeah, that's a great point. Especially about that. Yeah, especially about the animal sacrifices. But of course, we also have the Brit Milah, which is circumcision, which is also a
Mhm.
cutting of a covenant in a different sort
Mhm.
of way. And then even marriage, of course, in the consummation of a marriage, there is a type of cutting of covenant and a shedding of blood on the wedding night. So
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
that is all those things are blood covenants, and technically, um, you know, they all carry very high penalties
Mhm.
for breaking a covenant like that.
Yeah. The
Um,
other thing that popped into my mind when you were talking about Tav was a while back I was in the midst of worship, and then the phrase "I am the way, the truth, and the life" came to my head, and then immediately I saw Delet, and I went, "Oh, well, that's the way." So I need two other letters then, and I went to God and I was like, "Are you going to give me the other letters?" And He's like, "Have fun," So so I get to look it up. So when I looked into it, I thought, okay, what are the other letters for the other two? Life is kind of easy. That's a nun. The middle one, the truth, I kind of went, well, in looking at all the letters, the one that makes the most sense is the Tav, because of the fact that it's a covenant. You're making a vow, a promise, and you are saying, I'm going to keep this. I'm going to tell the truth in this. And so because of that, and because of the fact that the word in truth in Hebrew is emet, which has a Tav in it, I kind of went, well, maybe that's the most appropriate letter to be truth. And so the way the truth and the life is Dalet, Tav, and Nun. And when you put those together, it makes the word Dathan. And Dathan means belonging to the fountain, which I thought was very interesting, seeing as how God is the fountain. He's the source of life. And so all of these things, the way, the truth, and the life, they belong to the fountain.
hmm.
So
Um, so the way I would have thought about that,
Mhm.
and I'm saying that most likely I would have thought about it wrong because you're the pro here.
No.
Um,
There's
but
different interpretations,
but
I'm
but the
sure. So lay it
I
on me.
wouldn't. I understand what you're saying is in terms of the noon being symbolizing life, but
Mhm.
the way my brain would have worked is I would have
Mhm.
gone to the word chaim and used the cat
Mhm.
instead of the noon. That's just the way my brain would work it.
Yeah.
But that's probably wrong. So, but
No.
I wonder if what it would be to be uh, Dalet, Tav, and
And a
um,
hay
and a
or a
Chet.
ket.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Chet.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, but that's very interesting.
Yeah.
The
It'd
idea
be
of
worth
the
looking up.
fountain.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
And
belonging to the fountain.
a fountain is living water. It's
Yeah.
moving.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Along
So
with
that is yeah. So Derech for the way, Emet for the truth, and would it just be noon? The word noon?
I don't know. I just put those three letters together and then got the word Dathan out of those three letters
Yeah. Yeah,
and looked that up. Yeah.
that's very interesting.
Yeah. It's
well,
kind of fun.
well, if along with what you're saying, Angie, when you mentioned the word truth, the word tav, it means mark, sign, or seal, but symbolically, it's associated with truth, and it's the idea of reaching a goal. And what I find interesting about the tav is, if you're ever in Israel, and I know all you guys are dying to go, when you go to all those ancient synagogues, and they're all in ruins, but you have them in Kursi, you have them in Chorazin, Capernaum, Magdala, all their floors that are left, they're mosaic floors. And in all the mosaics on the floors, they have tavs in them.
Mm. Wow.
And Rich, what does that Tav represent?
What do you mean? What does it represent?
Well,
It
what
was
it
just a neat design they came up with.
no, what that Tav meant to the early church. You know how a lot
It
of the
was,
early church would make like it's they would say later on, this is a little bit later on, this isn't like Peter and Paul early, that but later on, during the Roman Empire, they would draw a fish, like somebody would draw half of a fish, and then
Yeah.
a stranger, if they were a believer, they would draw the other half of the fish, and then they knew you were in safe company. That was, of course, under Roman persecution. But early on, the symbol for the
Christian church.
basically the Messianic Church of the Way, the followers of the Way, the Notzrim, as they called themselves sometimes, the branches. They they used that tav because it was not only a symbol of the cross, but it was a symbol for the new or renewed covenant. And so that was kind of like the one of the signs of people following the movement of James and John and Peter. Basically, the earliest Jesus followers were using that Tav sign. And so you can see that not only, as Rich was saying, in the mosaic floors of these very early Messianic synagogues, but you can see it also in the graffiti. For instance, at the Garden Tomb, if you've ever, I don't know if you've ever been to the Garden Tomb, but to the right of the entrance of the tomb, there's a gigantic tav carved into the rock. Somebody carved a tav, and of course, again, that sign was used from the time of from the ascension of Jesus off of the Mount of Olives, from that time when the church was first founded, all the way to the very early Byzantine period. That's when that symbolism was used. And then you see the fish begin to sort of take over as sort of the sign for early Christians. So yeah, Rich, that's a really good point. The Tav was a very important symbol for for the early church in relation to the cross and also for the renewed covenant.
Hey, Rich, when you saw those